Hey friends, we are having some unexpected snow again. We keep thinking that winter is over, but it keeps not being over. So we're enjoying it. I'm about to head out to do some farm work in the snow and watch the kids play and sled. But it is Wednesday, so I thought I would try to film my Wellness Wednesday here real quick before I get going on my work. First off, before I get started, I want to make sure I make it clear yet again that I'm not a doctor or a nutritionist or a scientist or anything like that. I'm just trying to figure out my own health, and I try to learn from a lot of really smart people and then figure out how that applies to my life. And my videos are often just sharing what I have learned as it relates to my own body. So anything that I share should not be taken as medical advice or any kind of advice, really. I'm just sharing what I've learned. Sometimes sharing what you learn can help solidify it in your brain and help you kind of learn it better. So that is my goal here. I am not trying to convince anybody of anything. I'm just trying to regurgitate the things that seem to make sense for me. And like I always say, I could be changing my diet, changing my approach, changing my mind at any point. I'm always learning, I'm always changing and trying to adapt to all the new things that life throws at me. So this is just where I'm at right now and what makes sense in my mind, kind of explaining some things that I've seen going on in my body. And it's just some pondering. So if you would like to listen in on my pondering, keep watching. So in this video, I want to talk about something that seems counterintuitive, and that is how adding carbs to your diet can actually lower your blood sugar. It would be really nice if blood sugar was as simple as the amount of carbs you add equals how high your blood sugar goes. And so the more you fast or the more you lower your carbs, the lower your blood sugar goes. And that simplistic idea is about as simplistic as calories in, calories out. If you want to lose weight, all you have to do is eat fewer calories than you expend. Eat less, exercise more equals weight loss. Those of us that have been in the diet and weight loss world for even a little while oftentimes realize that it's more complicated than that. We want it to be a really simple mathematical equation, plus or minus, but usually the body is a lot more complicated. And blood sugar seems to be the same. So if our blood sugar was only controlled by what we ate, it would make more sense that the more sugar or carbs that turn into sugar that you eat, the higher your blood sugar would go. But that is not the full picture, because we can not only exogenously consume sugar, but we can endogenously create sugar in our own bodies. So our liver can produce glucose, and that is why we can fast, and that is why we can go on zero carb diets without dying, because we do need some glucose in our blood. If our blood glucose goes to zero, we will die. Of course, we've all heard of gluconeogenesis, which is taking protein and turning it into sugar when you need it, when you're not consuming sugar. So our bodies do a great job of keeping us alive and using the sugar that you eat, if you eat it, for all the processes that it needs. And if you don't eat sugar or don't eat anything, your body can produce as much glucose as it needs through the liver. So now getting into how actually eating carbs can cause your glucose to go down, and also the complications that go along with that. So this is something that I heard about many, many years ago from Dr. Alan Christensen. And his diets that he recommends are fairly low carb, like on the lower end, but he doesn't recommend very low carb or keto. And this is one of the reasons. So it's pretty well known, and even in the keto world, it's pretty well known that a keto diet can cause cortisol to be higher. It's a stress on the body, and advocates of the keto diet will say it's a good stress. It's like exercise is a stress. It's not a bad thing. But the fact is that it is a stress on the body, and stress can cause cortisol to be higher. And when cortisol is higher, as in with like a fight or flight situation where something, a bear is attacking you and your cortisol goes high, your liver starts pumping out glycogen so that you have enough energy to run away from the bear or to fight the bear or whatever it is that you need to do to survive. So what Dr. Alan Christensen said is that he noticed a lot of people coming to him that had been on a low carb diet had an elevated blood glucose level. And he said often the people coming from low carb diets had higher glucose on average than people coming from not low carb diets, which again seems counterintuitive. But the way that he explains this is that the constant rise in cortisol from being in the low carb or keto state for some people will just trigger their body to produce more glucose via the liver, and that's what keeps their blood glucose at that elevated level. So our bodies are really, really smart, and they really would like to keep us alive. That's like the number one goal. And so often with things that our bodies can get exogenously as well as endogenously, the body wants to make sure that it has enough. So if not enough is coming in exogenously, like from the outside, from what you're consuming, the body will often overproduce or produce extra endogenously because it's so important. And if there's some kind of a shortage from the outside, the body wants to really make sure that there's enough so it kicks in and can produce extra just to keep us safe. And like all of these things, some people will notice this a lot more than others. Some people won't really notice this response much at all. And then other people might have a really exaggerated response to the higher cortisol and have much higher blood sugar. So this is how adding in a few carbs can actually bring blood sugar down. And obviously it is a very fine line because obviously you can add too many and of course the wrong kinds. If you go out and start eating donuts and pizza and ice cream, your blood sugar, you're probably not going to see that lowering of a blood sugar effect. You're going to overcompensate and then your blood sugar is going to be higher. So this is what I saw when I started adding in a few more carbs. And by a few more carbs, I mean I went from probably between 10 and 30 total carbs to 50 to sometimes as high as 100 total carbs. And so I'm not going high carb, just adding in a few more. I noticed on my NutriSense CGM that my average blood sugar went down by 5 to 7 points. And my hypothesis for the reason for that is that being in that lower carb ketogenic state was causing me that little bit of a cortisol rise, enough that my body was trying to protect me and pumping out a little bit extra glucose just to make sure that I had what I need. And then when I started adding in some of those carbs that I do well with and not over consuming them, my body kind of relaxed a little bit and that cortisol level maybe went down just a little bit. And it was enough that my body kind of relaxed and was like, oh, we're fine. There's some glucose coming in. There's some carbs coming in. We don't need to overproduce. And that's what caused my blood sugar to lower a little bit. Now, there are some people who will say, and this is completely a valid hypothesis, that the reason blood sugar would go down from adding a few carbs is just because insulin goes up. And insulin is what takes the blood sugar out of the bloodstream and puts it into the muscle or to the fat cells. And that when you eat more carbs, it stimulates more insulin. And then the insulin clears out the blood glucose. And that's what causes the drop. And that's completely valid as well. And I am going to be testing my insulin, my fasting insulin here in a couple of weeks. So I will definitely share that when that comes. And it could be both of those things combined that cause a little bit of the blood glucose drop. So there's a lot of, the body is very complicated and there are a lot of moving pieces. Hello, Freddie. Hi. You just want to come say hello to everyone? Good morning. Thank you. This is nice. So this is all very interesting, and it was really interesting to see it happen in my body, like just to see the data, because I had heard this years and years ago, and I was like, I filed it away. And to see it actually play out in the numbers was really, really fascinating. And I totally recognize that for some people, this information is completely irrelevant, either because their bodies don't overproduce the cortisol in response to the ketogenic state, or because of things like food addiction and like binge eating disorder, where if you even add a tiny bit of carbs through things like beans or lentils or whatever, that is enough to cause cravings or binges, or you take a bite of some beans and then you're off eating donuts and ice cream. And so for some people, it's not worth it, like, to try to play that game of figuring out what carbs and how much in order to get the blood glucose to go down. Like, it's just playing with fire for some people. And I totally respect that. And this is another area where you just need to know your body and know what you can handle and what you can't. Also, this would have been very, very difficult to see and to navigate without a CGM. And I think that if I did not have the NutriSense CGM, I wouldn't have been able, well, obviously I wouldn't have seen the numbers very clearly, just with finger pricks and things like that. But then also figuring out which carbs to consume and the amounts in order to get enough to see that lowering of blood glucose without eating the ones that spike my blood sugar. It would have been just extremely difficult to try to figure that out. So again, if you don't have access to a CGM, can't afford it, or can't get your doctor to prescribe it, any of that, it's like, well, is it really worth trying to figure it out without that device? Maybe not. And again, this is where you're going to need to know your body and where you're at, because some people could have that super exaggerated response. So their blood glucose is a lot higher on the ketogenic state, and adding some carbs maybe would be a really, really good thing. But if you're someone like me, who even when I was on the very low carb ketogenic diet, my blood glucose wasn't in a dangerous place. I was not even close to pre-diabetic. It was actually very, very good. So like I have said before, I don't think I was in danger. I don't think anything bad was happening because of the place that my blood glucose was. I simply saw a drop when I added in the carbs. That is a sign to me that my body can handle a little bit of carbs, and I really, really value the variety. So I'm really happy to experiment with it. So I think this information is fascinating, and it's a good thing to have in mind. And it definitely has explained like what I've seen go on. What anybody does with it is going to really vary from person to person. And for me, since I really value that variety, I'm using that information to try to figure out how many and what kind of carbs that I can add and still see that blood glucose lowering effect. But for others who are doing really, really well on the very low carb or zero carb diets and are not looking to increase their variety the same way, maybe this information is just interesting, but not something to act on. So anyways, that is what I have been pondering. I will leave a link to a video where Dr. Alan Christensen explains this a little bit more. So if you're interested in hearing an actual professional doctor that knows what he's talking about talk about this, check out that video. Thanks for listening to my pondering. If you have any thoughts about it, I'd love to hear down below. I hope you guys are all doing great, and I'll see you again in the next video.